Hey, this is Ralph, and in this video I want to place a visual element right in the dead center of my visible web page space. So in the previous video, we created the body of our page so that it fills up the viewport, specifically using a minimum height of 100 VHs, 100% of the viewport height. And with that border on there, we can clearly see, okay, that border is stretching all the way around. And in fact, if I head over to my emulator, let's change this out to an iPad. There we go. We can see that that body of that page, or that red border, is filling up the viewport, regardless of the device the user is using. So now I want to put a visual element right in the center, vertically centered, horizontally centered, regardless of the device again. So on my markup, I'm going to head down to the body section, and I'm just going to create an element here. I guess we can just use a div hashtag center. There we go. Doesn't even need any content. So I've got this element div ID center, and let's make sure we can see it. I'm going to give it a width of 60%. Because I want this to look good on small devices like phones, medium devices like tablets, and large devices like desktops, I'm going to use a percentage there, but I think I will go ahead and throw in a max width of 600 pixels. So in case somebody has a really large display or TV, it's not going to get super big. All right, so I feel pretty good about that. I'm going to give it a height, and for the height, sure, how about, let's try 400 pixels. See how that looks. We might change that to a percentage, so we'll see how that relates. Now I want to center it, so I'm going to do position absolute. However, when you position something absolute, it's going to be positioned based on the first positioned parent. Well, and since I don't have any positioned parent, it's going to be positioned based on the body. Now, in this particular example, it's not really a big deal because the only parent for this center div is going to be the body. So this is actually not going to bother me too much. However, I do like the idea of positioning things absolutely within a positioned parent. So even though it's not necessary in this example, I'm going to put position relative on the body of my page. Won't do anything different, but if this was a header section and I was positioning something based on the header, or within the footer or an aside, I want that parent to be positioned, usually relative, so that I can position absolute the child inside. So as soon as I do a position absolute, I'm going to start off with top 0, left 0. I just like to see where it is. You know what? I need to put a background color on this element too, so that we can really see it. Background color, and I'll just use a darkish gray. And now we can see, it's clearly positioned in the top left of the space. All right, well that's cool, but that's not exactly where I want it. So I'm going to say I want it to be top 50% and left 50%. And when I do that, it's positioning based on the top left corner of that element, which can be okay. We just have to adapt to that now. Well, it's not exactly where I want it to be. So what I'm going to use here is the transform property with translate. Now with translate, I can change the X or the horizontal positioning and the Y or vertical positioning. I'm going to put in -50%, comma, -50%. Now the difference between the transform translate versus the position absolute is transform translate is moving the object based on the object's size, whereas positioning is moving the object based on the parent's size or dimensions. So translate -50% X and -50% Y is going to be half the width of my center div and half the height of my center div. That is going to result in a nice visual centering. Again, regardless of the device. So I'm in an iPad emulator right now. We can change this out to a Moto G4. There we go, still centered in the space. Surface Duo, and of course I can exit out of the emulator and I'm on the desktop and I've got that centered object right in there. And if I want to dial back the size of it, hey, no problem. We can simply change the width of this to something like 50%, change the height to maybe 300 pixels. And now we'll have that smaller object, but still centered. And it's okay that I'm changing those dimensions because I'm using transform translate -50%, -50% based on that particular element. There we go. So using that basic technique of position absolute and then transform translate, we can get an object nicely centered within our viewport space. Thanks for hanging out with me.